DeRiccco, and this is the bond team, and these are the folks that are going to take the new bond, the Measure L bond, and execute and build and do construction for the next 5 years. So to introduce Mr. DeRiccco, there's no way I could do him justice. The best way to do justice would say that he's one of the founding fathers of Delta College, and I really am very humbled. I don't mean to embarrass him, but he truly is the founding father of Delta College. So, Mr. DeRiccco, how did Delta College get started, and how is it located at University of the Pacific?
Okay. Well, yeah. First place, you got to go back to the early 60s, 59 and 60. At that time, you had two types of college districts. You had college districts like San Mateo, Foothill, that were large districts that had unified districts like we have today, and they had many elementary districts, many high school districts. You know, they were large. And then you had districts that were unified in the unified district. For instance, like Stockton Junior College. It was on the Pacific campus at first, and it was part of the Stockton Unified School. It was not another, and so if I lived in Lincoln Village, which I do, area, I was not part of the college, but I could attend the college. In other words, and then they would bill the county that I came from, San Joaquin County. And when they billed the county, they would put all the money they could put into it because they were going to get paid. So they could put, in other words, when they figured it out, they used ideas that were, we'll say, exaggerated, if you want to put it that way, and they would put as much in as they could. Now, then they would put a $200 seat tax. Now, that'd be like $2,000 more they would put in. And then what they would do is they send that to the county. And as these, you could all come from the county would take that figure, so many $100,000, figure out how much taxes they have to levy. They would automatically levy that tax on everybody to pay for that. And so what happened is, as that tax grew, you know, remember, at that time, a 25-cent tax was for the junior college. Now, as it grew, it got over 25 cents. And people on the outline there said, we can't say anything about what they teach. We have to pay them more than and they're making money, and then they didn't have to spend it on the Stockton Junior College. They could spend it in elementary, they could spend it on their administration, they could spend it any way they wanted. It was perfectly legal. So when it got to that point, there were about 3 or 4 people, like Gus Schmid of Manteca, Leo Dior, who was executive, you know, at the Stockton Record, and Wilbur Salmon. Wilbur Salmon was the school district organization chief. You know, he was the head of that. You know, he on that board. They said, why can't we build our own junior college? Why should we pay Stockton? So they decided they were going to build it, and they had me go out because I worked for Leo Dior. I was an elementary superintendent. And so we went through all the figures, and they figured, why can't we build our own junior college? The original idea was not to take in Stockton, this college. Leave Stockton out of it and take everything around Stockton in the county. But then, of course, when Bert Bradley heard about it, who was here, said, why don't you include us? Well, that had never been done. Remember, you had Fresno, you had Modesto, you had Los Angeles. They were all part of the unified. No one had ever separated and taken a unified district. We were the first one, and then they decided to do it. Well, of course, when Stockton Unified, Dr. Pulliam was the superintendent then, and he said, they'll never make it. Then when he saw they were going to make it, he really came out against it, but he couldn't stop it because they were well thought of, like Leo Dior, and they rolled it through, and they got it. Once they got it, of course, then they included this area, and they had to separate. Now remember, they had more board members that were outside of Stockton. So most of the board members said, get away from Stockton. In other words, we don't want Stockton to say anything. So they, at that time, even the business, they said, we'll take over the business too. And after that, when like Modesto did it and a few of the others did it, they did not take their business office right off the bat. They let it operate because it's sometimes hard to do it on one day.
Yeah.
We did it on July 1st, we took over everything. In fact, we wrote the first check, and I still have copies of it. The first check was signed by Dr. Bradley. It was to me for $25,000, so we could set up a fund so we could pay for some things. And that was it, you know. And that's the way the whole thing started. And that's how the college got started, you know, in that way. And then, of course, there were a lot of things we did wrong. Now, you got to realize that with the first one, you're going to make a lot of mistakes. One thing we made a mistake on, we should have put it in the legislation, that when we separated from Unified, we would get the campus, and we would get a certain amount of money. The money they gave us, a little bit of their ending balance, as little as they could. As far as the campus, nothing. But they charged us, they said they will lease it. Well, we first wanted to maybe move off, but where can you go? You've got a college you got to run, so we were stuck with that. And they really got us. They got us like, you can't believe. I don't remember, $300,000 or $400,000 a year. You know, you figure that today would be like $4 million. You know, and it was just beyond anything. So we did get some legislation to help us that we could levy a tax for it. But, you know, it really hurt us. And they had that controlled, but how could you do anything? And so that was another thing. Another thing is we didn't have very much money, and we had a summer session going.
Oh.
So I got here, and there was a summer session. Now, teachers want to get paid.
Really?
The classified have to get paid. A few of the administrators we had have to get paid. And when I figured it out, we didn't even come close to paying the first payroll. And so Bert Bradley said, what do I do? I said, we were part of the State Department of Education, and we only had 2 members in the State Department. So I said, go up and see Harper. He goes, you know, I said, I know Harper. I said, because I was an elementary superintendent. I said, go see Harper and see if he'll give us an advance. You know, I said, how much? I said, at least $400,000 so I can, you know, make the payment. And so he went up there, and he came back and he said, that Harper is a nut. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we got in a big fight and he told me he wouldn't give me anything. And I said, why didn't you just go up there and sort of beg? You know, and he said, no. And so he said, you go up. So I went up and I knew Harper. And I said, Ed, you got to give me some money. He goes, you got a man that's a nut, and I'm not going to give you any money. I said, how am I going to make it? I said, I can't make it. I can't, you know, I got PG&E, I've got a telephone, and I've got to pay the teachers. And he said, no. Then, at the end of the day, I'll give you $90,000. I said, $90,000? I can't make it with $90,000. Because then I get my apportionment after that, you know, the following month. I said, I can't make the first month. He said, $90,000. So I came home, I had $90,000. And I added the other money, and I figured, I'll pay the teachers, I'll pay the classified, because they need it too. The administrators get 10 cents on the dollar for now. I said, all the administrators get 10 cents on the dollar, and I figured, and then I won't pay the PG&E bill, and I'll tell them that I'm in the trouble. I won't pay the light bill, I won't pay any bills at all, you know, for any equipment or anything. That's what I did. And then Bert Bradley came and he goes, what do you mean? I get 10? I said, you get 10 cents. What about Ed Raleigh, Dr. Raleigh? He get 10 cents on the, what about you? 10 cents on the dollar. And so we did, and we did. Later on, we were able to make it. And in fact, the end of the first year, I put 100, remember, I could do things that you can't do now. I could, you know, in other words, we had taxing power too. I used to set the tax, and then remember, the free areas, like around Modesto, they could, if they came to Stockton, I could get paid for those. So remember, now I was like the county, and I had a taxing power, and of course I could tax only within certain limits, of course, and that was the way it worked. And so I was able to do. In fact, I put up $100,000 in a special account at that time, which later on helped build Atherton. That was the first 100,000, and then later on, you know, when other people, like when, you know, Dr. Blanchard, you know, took over. When Blanchard took over, you know, he had such a small administration. I still put the money on administration, but then all the extra money we didn't use, I put it in that fund. So we built that with money that we were saved. And those are some of the things that we did at that time. They're sort of crazy, but that's how it worked.
Mr. DeRiccco, I've heard two things. One, that you were employee number one.
Yeah, well, I came in here because first of all, I told you, in other words, I had people that wanted me to end, but not everybody. And so they said, apply. And I was going to go into the county. And I had a Fulbright too. And I thought of the Fulbright, but remember, the Fulbright only would pay me half my original salary. I was at Cal. And I figured, I don't know if I can make it financially. So I was going to go in the county as a business officer in the county. And Leo Dior said, apply. And I said, okay, I applied. And there were about 122 applicants at that time. And I figured that's out of the question. When it got down to 50, I was still in it. When it got down to 20, I was still. Now I began to pay attention. And I realized one reason why I used to teach many years ago in a 3-teacher school. And I got, my first salary incidentally was $2,700 a year. Wow. I want you to know, that was my first salary thing. I was principal of a 3-teacher school, in other words. And so at that time, I would teach from 8 to 5 because I had 51 children, so I'd have small groups come in. You can't have all the reading groups at the same time. So I would start at 8, 8:30, 9, 9:30, 10, and then they'd leave at 2:30, 3, 3:30, 3:30, 4 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock, and they'd be gone. Then on Saturdays, I taught a half a day of enrichment math. In other words, I'd go out, but that was limited to 30 children, and they came from Lathrop, some came from Stockton, but the first 30 that would be it. And so when I was teaching that, University Pacific, you remember, the dean there said, can I send people out to watch? I said, sure, go ahead. You know, you don't pay any attention who's observing you, you have to teach the class. So I would teach a class in an unusual way, tear a paper, throw it across the room, and say, what have you got? I got half, and I got half. Okay, we started out with 100, you got 50, and I got, and that's the way you teach, you know. And then we built models of things like that, so they had to figure out how many square feet, how many cubic feet in the house. If they had a swimming pool, how much water would it take to fill it? And of course, they learn how to do that. If you're going to put carpet, and the carpet in the Southern record says it's 12 feet, and what's the best way to carpet it with, you know, financially? So they learn. Well, Leah Bradley, who was Dr. Bradley's wife, was going to going back to teaching. She watched me do it. And she told Burke Bradley, and Burke Bradley said, he was a math then. He said, I want him then. And so he wanted me. And so with Leo Dior and Judge Dara was the other one that pushed for me. And but I wasn't unanimous choice. I want you to know that.
Really?
I was not a unanimous choice. But after that, after 1 year, the people who didn't want me did say yes. And I did get in. And that's how, but now Dean McNeely, who you're going to meet, was a unanimous choice. Yeah. The board wanted him. In fact, they paid a little extra to get him. They really wanted him. He was wanted right from the beginning by everybody. I was not.
Mr. DeRiccco, yeah. On this current campus here,
yeah,
what was the initial vision for this site?
Okay. Well, first we had sites all over. You know, we owned this. We were, you know, the site over on Hammer that goes over. Hammer Lane goes out. You know, if you look, when you get to the top, you look over there. We had 200 acres there we were going to get. And Charlie Weber owned the land. Remember Charlie Weber? Mm-hmm. And in fact, Charlie Weber, one time I was president of the Native Sons, and I had to introduce Charlie Weber. And he was our speaker on September 9th, which is admission day for the state. And he sat next to me and he said, do you know that they filed papers to condemn my property? And I did it. And he said, I'd like to get the person who did it and kill him. But I didn't admit that I did it. You know. But anyway, Leo Dior resigned over that. Yeah, because he was so much against taking over someone's property that didn't want it. And Leo Dior resigned. So we lost a good board member, and we had that property. Then, that we didn't. We went through it, and all heck broke loose. Then we started getting other properties. And then, you know, I came up with one. Because at that time, Rough and Ready Island was going to be abandoned. And I figured, why don't we take the whole island, you know, and have a golf course beside. When I told Bert Bradley that, he said, please don't give me another site, you know, because we were having all kinds of problems. And he was really having his problems with that. Then we finally did work out a deal with the state. You know where the Black Angus is?
Yes.
We bought the property.
Oh, I didn't know.
We actually bought the property. And I got the state to pay 80% of it. So we bought the property at Black Angus. Now remember, no freeway. When I dug a hole, I hit water at 5 feet.
Wow.
And I figured, man, oh man. And Siegfried was our, you know, consultant to do the, you know, underground. And he said, you're going to have to run stakes down through there. The cost was going to be just, because you had to run concrete stakes down so that thing would be, you know, meet the earthquake rate. Well, we hit water. Now, I did have a top cover because I didn't want a kid to fall in there. So I'd go out there and check it. The water would be at 5 feet at night and down about 8 feet in the daytime. See, the tide.
Oh, wow.
And there was no freeway, remember, to help that. So the water would come in. And so we were worried about that. And then what happened is this site became available. Now, the state then said, you know, so we got people like everybody that moved this way, and we were able to work it out with the state. And then I had the state pay again, you know, and they didn't catch on that they had originally paid until later.
Well, we won't report.
So we ended up probably paying $180, $200 an acre. Can you imagine here $200 an acre for this land? We ended up, when they found out about it, they said, why didn't you say something? Why should I say anything? I mean, I worked out the best deal for the college. And of course, they couldn't do anything about it, but they weren't very happy with it. But anyway, it did work out. And that's how we got the site here.
Okay.
Now, when we got the site, of course, even naming the district, remember, was a problem.
Okay.
Because you figure, most people were in that outer area. You know, they were, and they didn't want it called anything that would resemble Stockton. And they wanted a San Joaquin. Of course, there was a couple that wanted Delta. There was one group that really fought for Jedediah Smith. Jedediah Smith Junior College District. I know people can't, and the only thing I said is, if you name it Jedediah Smith, you're going to find that Jedediah did things you maybe didn't like. You know, when you start going into these things, you know, these things can come up. Well, Jedediah Smith came up pretty good. Now, Ed Raleigh had a suggestion. We'll name it after someone who's rich, so they'll give us money, you know. But anyway, that night we went around and around and around, and then we ended up with San Joaquin Delta Junior College. That's how we got the two of them together. Otherwise, it would have been Delta or it would have been San Joaquin.
Or Jedediah Smith.
But Jedediah Smith, no. You know, that was really, most people can never remember that was one of the names that they really pushed.
Yeah, I never heard that one.
Yeah.
So after you bought the land, how did you figure out what you wanted to do as far as buildings
Okay,
go?
originally, there were buildings here. You know, there were the buildings, they were in here. The original plan was not to tear them down.
So the
We were going to connect them all together, and we had one tunnel that went from Pacific all the way to Pershing underneath this thing. And of course, when we got involved in that, they said, you know, like Siegfried, you can't put anything on top of it. So we were going to have a space down the middle. But, you know, that didn't work out, that idea. So it wasn't too long after that, they decided, we'll do it. Now, we had to pick out an architect. Now, in picking out an architect we didn't just go out and hire an architect. We went through a process you can't believe. First place, we found all the architects that wanted to apply. Then we went through and canceled some of them. Like one of them was Mayo Johnson and D. Wolf. And I'll tell you why I did. They built the courthouse, incidentally. And I didn't like what they did. And I did object to them. And I said, you know, I had worked with them before. And Warren Wong applied. Now, his plan wasn't too bad, really, and locally. But we went through, and we finally got narrowed it down to John Carl Warnke, who was, incidentally, he was the roommate of John Kennedy at Stanford. And he did the Kennedy gravesite, incidentally, because she called him up after that. He said, would you do? And he did San Mateo Junior College. He did quite a few back east. He did the airport at Oakland. He did quite a few things. And then, of course, Mayo, we had, you know, here, Kumpf. But with Kumpf, we said, he's good at design. Now, he did Carmel High School. You know, when you go by there, that was his first building he ever built. But he did University of Beirut. He did Foothill College. He did, you know, Cabrillo College. So he did quite a few things. Now, I would have, if I had my choice, I'd have probably chosen John Carl Warnke. I really liked one of the plans that he had. But they picked, you know, and we did go.
Who did you pick, Mr.?
We picked Kumpf, yeah, and associate. Yeah, and we picked him, they picked him, you know, the board did, and that was it. Now, in picking him, you know, he was very good. Now, he did design the total campus. It wasn't originally designed this way. It had longer overhangs. It had slate roofs. But remember, we had to make some changes financially. So we did some of those. Now, the one thing that I really object to now, you know, is the changing of the architecture. I don't object, you know, new building, but I would have liked to stay the architecture the same, like UOP is doing it. Because we first place in I think about 82 or 83, we were picked the #1 campus in the nation, community college, because of our architecture. And I would have liked to see that. That's the only thing that I may be critical about. I would have liked to see it stay that way, because I would have liked to see, you know, UOP. I was over at UOP not too long. They put new buildings in, but they do fit. I mean, they do fit. And so that was part of it. But,
Mr. DeRiccco, the actual design, how I've heard it, like from the old gold mining days and things. Can you talk about the architecture?
They did it because they wanted to, you know, bring in the outline. Now, let me tell you, the first campus, the campus they designed for the original campus on the over Hammer, I have copies of that. I'll put you some of this stuff. I'll put it in papers and give it to you so you can have it. It was entirely different. It was square buildings with you know, slate roofs, and it had a big lake in the middle, and you went around the lake to get to the administration building. It was because it was built for that side. And when we got over this side, they decided to go this route, you know. So Kumpf did have two different concepts. Here was this one, and that one was entirely, and both done by Kumpf, and both entirely different. So you can see that, you know, but it would have been all the same again. You know, over there would have been all the same. But I'm glad we didn't build there, because, you know, this is a much prettier site.
Yes.
And a better site, I really think so.
So you answered about the site. I was going to ask if it was controversial. What actual Delta College people were involved? I know the Board of Trustees, but as far as the staff, people like this that are managers and staff?
Very few. There was, of course, Ed Raleigh for 1 year. then he left. And
He was the instructional man.
He was the instructional man. And when he left, you know, and that was it. I mean, we brought in Blanchard.
Okay.
But Blanchard came in, you know, he had a lot of people pushing him, like Schmid and you know, because they wanted him. And so he just automatically came in. And he became the number 2 man. I was number 3 then, because he was the vice president and I was not, you know. And then we went through that phase, you know, that era when we had problems all over the campuses. Remember, UOP had campus problems, we had campus problems.
You mean in the 60s with civil rights?
About 68, yeah.
Okay.
Really bad problems.
Yeah.
And we were on the old campus, and they were breaking windows like you couldn't believe, you know, overnight. And of course, we had a flamboyant president, you know. He was a wonderful person, but he was flamboyant, and, you know, that was Dr. Bertolazzo. And he was very successful in getting the people, but he was also very controversial with some people because he was a Republican who was extremely liberal. Now, I know how you can, but I'm not saying whether liberal or conservative is good or bad, but it did cause a lot of problems on the campus. And we had a lot of problems. And in fact, some of the problems went all the way to Washington because they had the FBI on the campus and people didn't realize they were on the campus, and like they wanted to start a bail bond. And of course, at that time,
wow, I've never heard this.
The code said that the business officer had to approve it. And I was the business officer, and I wouldn't approve it. And they said, oh, you know, you have to approve it. I don't have to approve it. And so what happened is they came into the office, they broke down the door, you know, and really, you know, one of them had murdered a person and was on parole. And he really was very tough. And another one was, I can tell you the name because I just had lunch with him about 2 years ago, Lee Chilton. They call him the glove man. He makes the gloves for the Giants and all those people. And he was very anti, but we had lunch together a few years ago, you know, and we sort of back. But at that time, things were really rough. And they did get Dr. Bertolazzo to sign that, you know, set up a bail bond. But the fund was never set up, but they made copies of it. And Reagan got copies of it. And of course, it went to and later on, Dr. Bertolazzo applied for a job, and I think it really hurt him a little bit. You know, there are little things. I mean, I don't want to, but Dr. Bertolazzo you can really think a lot of good things about him. He did a lot of good things for this college. You know, but he did have some problems at that time, and he had problems with the board. In other words, like in negotiations, I used to do the negotiations, and the board would say, now we want to give them 3.5%. Well, naturally, I wouldn't start out at 3.5%. I started at 1%, and they would start at 14%. And then we would go back and forth, and usually we ended up very close to where, well, this one time, you know, he said, I don't want you to waste your time. And so actually, he offered them more money than they requested. And then the board jumped all over me. But, you know, but see, we should have given him more. And so he did the right thing. But, you know, and he was only here 1 year. He was only
why. I wonder why.
He was here
Now, the first building, Mr. DeRiccco, what
Yeah.
was the first building that was built here?
That was Cunningham.
Okay.
Cunningham was the first building built, yes. And at that time, we ran buses back and forth. Because, see, if you had a class and you had to go over to the science class, you would have to go with the bus over here and then take the bus back for your other classes.
So that was for math and science in those
That
days?
was the same that is today, math, science, and you know, the labs and that. Another thing, when we did build that building, you know, we built the building, that building, we did something unusual in bidding it. Normally, we would bid with all the furniture, you know, not
Yes.
furniture, but the fixed furniture
Sure.
in the building. We separated it because Ralph McClure, who was Union Planing Mill, said, I'd like to bid on the equipment, on the labs, you know, and so we figured, why don't we make it possible? Because most of the people that were doing the labs then were from West Virginia and from North Carolina, that area. And they were getting, for instance, if you bid the building, they would get the job of putting all the equipment in. And we figured, we'll make it a double bid. Make one bid and then get, and if Union Planing doesn't get it, so what? I mean, we've done what, you know, we've done, and so we did it that way. And then we let the faculty come and look at the equipment. You know, the one from West Virginia, the one from North Carolina, and the one from, and before even I told them what the bid was, I said, now pick the one you want. They all picked Union Planing. And then it was a low bid. So we were able to do it that way. Well, when we did that, the low bid, people, you know, got the money here. Then later on, Ralph McClure got bids from back east because they came to visit. We got, they must have got 18 or 20 different jobs around the nation. So they made millions of dollars just on the, you know, because of what we did. And it kept people working here in Stockton.
Yeah,
so it worked to our benefit in the long run. Now, it didn't hurt us at all, you know, because it worked out. We did have some crazy things like, you know, the chairs, the seats like in the theaters. And well, I had them all in my office. Now, we called certain specifications of leaf springs, and not leaf springs, but, you know, coil springs and things like that. Well, when they were in the office, I got the bids, I took them apart with a screwdriver, and I checked them. And so I went to the board, and I said, the low bid doesn't meet specifications. Well, it was Holzingers. They jumped up and they said, you took them apart. And I said, yes, I did. And they said, you were wrong. And so they really got into a big argument, and the board went along with us, with me. But the next day, I was sued for $50,000 personally, and the college was sued for $500,000. So I figured, my gosh, you know so I had, it was going to be tried, you know. It was, Judge Dozier was the judge, very bright fellow. And so we went down and went to court, and, you know, Richard Dickinson was my attorney. And so we got there, and Judge Dozier knew me, and he said, I've read the material. And he said, well, he shouldn't have taken it apart. He could have jumped them and tried it, but he shouldn't have taken them apart. And Judge Dozier goes, why'd you take them apart? I said, I want to see if they met specifications. He turned around and he said, I'm glad he took them apart. I'm a taxpayer. And he goes, he should have taken them apart. I don't know why we even, and he threw the case out of court.
Oh, that's great.
So it was the best thing that could have happened. You know, and then he turned to me and he said, and you get back to work because I'm paying your salary. You know, and so it worked out to our benefit. So sometimes we did crazy things that worked to our benefit. And sometimes we did crazy things that didn't work to our benefit. In other words, we did things wrong. And we had to admit we made a mistake. And we made many mistakes. I'm not saying we didn't make mistakes. We made a lot of mistakes.
Mr. DeRiccco, on Cunningham, when you got into the ground and started digging, did you find a lot of surprises?
The biggest surprise was the tunnel.
Oh.
I walked through the tunnel.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, I walked through the tunnel, and I had the bend. There were rats all over the tunnel. There were even a few snakes. That place was a mess under there. But at that time, we thought, maybe we ought to clean it up because it had concrete wall, and then build the campus so that it doesn't touch the tunnel. And then we use the tunnel for all the, you know, extra, like if the future, we can't figure out how much wiring we're going to need.
Oh, wow.
We could have put maybe the wiring in there. Probably should have done that. But we decided we're going to have to take it out. Now, taking it out at first seemed like a simple thing. Taking it out was not a simple thing. They had to go down and break it out and take it up. And it was just a mess to take out. And then, of course, when you take it out, your soil has to be compacted before you build anything on it. So it turned out Another thing, the water tower. We had a water tower here, on the campus, a huge water tower. And Blanchard said, that water tower, I don't like it. And I said, neither do I. But, and then what happened is, a couple of kids went up that water tower, and they put a sign on it that was not, the words were not good. In other words, and here we had that sign up there, and so, and then I tried to go up that water tower. I got about a third of the way up, and I couldn't go any higher. And I figured, I got to get somebody to go up there and paint that thing off. So we did get someone to go up there and paint it off. But, you don't like a person hanging on the side of the water tower if he should slip or something. So then they put another sign up, and then Blanchard said, get that water tower down. So about midnight, we took a tractor, tied it to the water tower, and pulled it down, and it came down and crashed, and we got rid of the water tower.
That was a good old day.
Also, where Atherton's at, we had a ficus tree. You know what a ficus is? Huge ficus. It must have been 8 or 10 feet across the base. If you've been to Santa Barbara, they have a big ficus near their station, a huge one. Well, that was like that one. But it was really rotten. It had a lot of rot in it. Now, I called Dr. Kelson from Sonoma, and he looked at it and he said, take it out. Nothing's ever going to save it. So we decided we were going to take it out. Well, the word gets out, and the students want to save the tree.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah. So I decided I'll take it out on a Saturday. So I came up with McDonald from the old campus. We came out in a truck with the saw. When we got here, there was, now remember, it was many years ago, a young lady in a skimpy bikini. In those days, bikinis were not as common as they are today. And she had strapped herself in the tree. The Stockton Record was there. And the television people were there. And they said, why don't you go out and pull her out of the tree? That would have been a perfect picture of me pulling her out of the tree, And first place, I don't think I could have climbed the tree that well. But secondly, I had no intention of, so I said, well, she saved the tree. And McDonald, who used to work for it, I'll cut the tree around her. I said, don't cut the tree around. So we got back into the thing and drove out, and you know where the track is? They had a bunch of poplar trees then. All poplar trees. When we got behind the poplar trees, I said, just stay here. And after a while, the Stockton Record left. Then the what do you call it, left. She unstrapped herself. She came down from the tree. We came back and cut the tree down. But it was better than, trying to do those other stupid things. Gosh, it would have been absolutely stupid to pull her out of the tree. But we had when they did some of the, they were against, like when the Iranians were here. Remember, they used to walk around with the bags on their head. We did that, and we had that problem. And they came into the office, and they said, we don't intend to pay for our tuition anymore. They had spent their money when they went down to burn the Shaw's sister's house down in Los Angeles area. And so, we had problems with them, and I told them, and all kinds of things came up. Like, for instance, we canceled them out. They had to go back to Iran. One of the young ladies came in and said, I can't go back to Iran. Why not? Because she was Jewish, and of course, things have changed, and she couldn't go back, so we had to get State Department to allow her to stay here, things like that. But we did, like I say, we made many mistakes too.
Mr. DeRiccco, can you just ballpark, how much did the Cunningham building, how much did it cost, and were you in budget or over budget?
No, we were in budget almost in every building. We stayed below the amount that we said we would pay for taxes in all cases. The only buildings that we had problems with, when we built the gymnasium and the theater, what we did is we had a bid, the architects give you about what you're gonna be. And, if you're within 2%, then you can accept it, either way. But if it's more than that, you've got to start objecting to it. Well, we had one bid that came in here, I think it was those buildings, but anyway, I opened the bids at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and Blanchard would sit there and I'd open them and read them. And of course, you have to be careful that, you can't accept them if they're 10 seconds late. So we
know that one.
We had one that came in late, we couldn't accept it. But anyway, when we opened the bids, the first bid came in, and it was about close to $2 million more. Now, to figure that today would be like, a lot, 10 times that. Mm-hmm. And I said, Joe looked at it and said, he really growled. And I said, don't worry, it's only one bid, we got 4 more. The others were all higher. And so he went into the office and he called the architect. I think he used the telephone. I think he maybe yelled. They heard him. But he really, really chewed them out. Well, I called Foothill, because Foothill had opened their bids that afternoon, and they had the same problem. And West Valley opened their bids, and they had the same problem. And I said, what are you going to do? He goes, we're going to scale down the thing, and in 6 months rebid it. And I said, maybe we should have to do that too. And I went home, and my wife said, what's the matter? And I said, oh, I can't even eat. And I couldn't eat very much. I said, I'm going back to work. I said, I got to check. Because remember, I used to put money in different places. And I came back, and I tried to work out something. And about midnight, there was a knock on the door. And I opened the door, it was Blanchard. He said, can we make it? I said, well, if we move this money, he said, figure it all out and don't tell anybody anything. Have it on my desk. And so he went, decided we were going to go ahead. But he didn't tell anybody until we had a board meeting, and he sprung it out and they went with it. Well, it was the right thing, because we didn't cut back. We made it. Foothill cut back. West Valley cut back. They redid it. Their second bid came in about 4% higher than the original bid. Remember, inflation was running 16, 17%. So they didn't succeed in what they wanted to do. They really hurt themselves. But he did the right thing. And like I say, he gets very little credit for it, Blanchard does. He deserves more credit. I deserve a lot less credit than I get. Yeah, I really feel that. But he did, the personality, like for instance, he would have a meeting, and sometimes he'd get up, we'd be at the meeting, and he'd walk out. And people say, what does that mean? That means the meeting's over.
Mr. DeRiccco, I apologize, I got to interrupt.
Yeah.
We have a couple people that had to leave very shortly. Maria, I'm hoping you can stay. I wanted to, but I know that you have to go, Raquel. Are there some finance, anything you want to ask Mr. DeRiccco?
Actually, the main question I had was just about whenever this campus was being built, was there any kind of frictions? We go through friction all the time about decisions that are being made. So on the early team that designed this campus, were there any major disagreements between
Not really major disagreements. So, there's always but no, there we didn't have the problem. The only problem, like I said, we had this one time because of the bid, but not really. See, they had picked the architect, and they had really gone through this. And, you got to figure the board at that time was, the board had a lot of problems at the beginning because Leo Dior left, Wade Hofer resigned in the first board, and like for instance, they wanted to break the district up after a year or so because there were people that were complaining that they didn't like the way the district was going, and they said break the district up and go back to the original. It would have been first district broke, and so we had to that, and we had to go down to Los Angeles to the education was meeting down there. And so what we did is we went through the list of the people on the board, and most of them were farmers. We were going to use DeRiccco to be our spokesperson, but then we said, my God, they're all farmers. Most of them, over 70% were farmers. So we said, we'll use Wilbur Salmon. And we went down and we went to Joe and Dara's family. We had dinner there. It was on Good Friday. And we had dinner at her house. My wife was with me, and all of, just the top administrators. And then we went down, and Wilbur Salmon got up and he said, I'm just a poor farmer. And he went, and of course the board went with us, and we were able to keep the district. But we had a lot of problems, like at the beginning, the district, because, see, they didn't mesh well. But then later on, of course, different people left the board, and it reset itself. And so the board did get together after that. But at the very beginning, we had a lot of problems, the first 2 or 3 years. 2 years, yes. That was just, we didn't have the building program going. We had more of the trying to get the thing off the ground.
Once you started building, Mr. DeRiccco, in Cunningham, what were some of the problems that we ran into, and how did you fix them?
Now, you see, Blanchard was quite, and we knew that if you take change orders, you're going to get really stuck, because the more change orders you get, they got you then. And you can negotiate, but it's hard to negotiate. Like you say, I've got to have this, and I'm trying to negotiate. If I've got to have it, it's hard to negotiate. So that's one thing we said, no change orders unless absolutely necessary. One change order we did make, when you go into Atherton and you get over to, you notice that they slant up a little bit. We moved them up so they slant, the edges, so that you could see a little bit better from the corner.
The chairs.
The chair, that first loft that goes
Yes,
up, it tilts up a little bit. That was one change we did make. But that's about the only change that we made. Now, we did have, like Jay Roy did a lot of the building. He's a very good person to work with, a local person, and very good. We had one concern who did the track, and that was a terrible concern. And what they would do is they wanted to make changes. So they wanted me to approve the changes. And so they would give me like a case of scotch at the doorway. And I had to call the board members up and say, I got a case of scotch and I'm sending it back. And things like that.
Was it good scotch?
It was good scotch.
Oh, okay.
But I sent it back. You had to and document it. Because, you can't take that kind of a thing, accept things like that. And another thing, like Coca-Cola bid. Now, if you know Bobby or Barron, you'll get a kick out of this one. Because when I did the first Coca-Cola bid, now mind you, I've been there only about 7 months. I'm on the board, talking to the board. And I'm the business officer. And I just opened the bids for Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. Because they're fighting, at that time they were really going at, see, they wanted to get the colleges, so you drink the right Coke. Some people like Pepsi, some like Coke, and that. And so they really cut their bids. They were actually charging us less than they were charging any outlet at all. The cola and then the seltzer water and all that. So I just took the low bid, and I thought I was being fair. We got there, they said, the loser, I don't know if it was Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola, said DeRiccco gave the other concern our bid so that they could outbid us. Now, remind me, I don't have the reputation honest. The board know me that well. I was just dumbfounded, but I did come up with the right answer. We'll rebuild it have the county council open the bids with you here. So we rebid it, and Dickinson came from the county council, and they opened the bids, and they read the bids, and I think the same company won or something. But it was fine because, and that happened every year. But of course, after 3 years, we did the bidding again, and it wasn't quite as bad. When Bob Barron came, I said, be real careful on the bids. He went through and he recommended, and we had the same problem, and I said, no, and of course the board understood that, and it was not a problem. The last year I was here, I had to rebid it, and I figured, here we go again with that, but I was kidding. And when we opened the bids, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, RC won. And I laughed so hard because it was RC, and we used RC for a year or two, after I left, because, and incidentally, RC has a little more syrup than the other two. So now I drink a lot of RC.
But now, before we lose you, and I see you, Stacy, you're getting ready to go. Anything else? Because we're going to ask, the rest of the team is going to ask some questions. Is there anything else before you leave?
No.
Okay. We're going to have this recorded.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Stacy, are you?
Yeah.
You're okay? Okay. Then Maria, she's the director of facilities, and what questions would you like to ask?
If there was something that you would do differently from the past, what would that be?
Probably a lot of things. It's hard to really be specific because, when you make mistakes, you just have to admit you made a mistake. And that, I'm glad that I did that when I did. But not any big things, because the big things did go my way. I was very lucky. Like I said, in taxes, for instance, all the taxes we did, in other words, we had to set up a tax thing, and we had to stay within a certain thing. Now, Blanchard did not like to increase taxes, even though we could legally do it, some of them, because you were allowed this and you were allowed that in those days, and it was different than it, how it worked then. See, you had, and then when Proposition 13 came in, we really got penalized because, let me tell you why. First place, we had been spending a lot less than our neighboring district. In other words, our costs per student in teaching was less than theirs. Our salaries were higher than theirs, much higher. But we used, those, like for instance, Maslow would teach that class, and then we split it up. For instance, like even he would maybe lecture to 200, 130, 140, and he would meet with 20 at a time for the interplay, but not, in other words, so that we would generate a lot of ADA, then we use the ADA elsewhere. Well, because of the way it worked out, they figured out what you spent the year before, and that became your base. So you had low revenue districts and high revenue districts. So that was one mistake that we made. We should have been a high revenue district. In other words, should have spent more, we would have been locked in on the higher. Now, I fought that thing for years, and when I left, we had narrowed it down, so it wasn't quite as bad as it is. I don't know how it works now. I don't understand.
Very similar.
And then I made, like for instance, I made another mistake at the state. When I was at the state, I was head of the Committee on Finance with CJCA. So I would meet up there, and I would represent a lot of the colleges when I used to go up, and Garamendi was a personal friend. And, I went to all his weddings of all his children and all that. And so I had quite an in with him and Pat Johnson. So I could get things, and Garamendi would always be on the committee to reset things. And so I was very lucky to get things done up there. And so things worked out our way in that case, But we did a lot of crazy things too that were wrong, like anybody else would make mistakes. We made our share of mistakes. I made, like for instance, on one there, when we were going through it, I really thought, remember we had taxing power, and they were trying to set up after Proposition 13, how are we going to end up? Well, the unified districts were all set up. They were going to take over, the state was going to take over. With the community colleges, they weren't sure. What they had decided was let them decide on their own. And for instance, we would have gone half on taxes and half on the state. And so I was walking down the hall, I was up there, and I didn't realize that my president was there. He was in charge of that group. I didn't realize that, but Tom Fryer, who was at Foothill, he was on my committee on finance, and he didn't know anything about finance. He was a great scholar. But, he admitted, I don't know anything about finance. But he thought I did. So he saw me down the hall, and he said, come in here. Give us your idea on what to do. And I said, keep your taxing power. Keep your taxing power. That way, if the state doesn't give you any money, or like they did one year, they gave us nothing, because, we wouldn't put the tuition in and all that. At least you get the taxing power. You're going to get 2% more.
Yes.
And then you're going to get any new buildings. So you're going to end up
I see.
getting more than 2%. Now, right now, this is the first year you would get less.
Really?
Because, you see what,
Yes,
but think of all the years you would have made all that money. You'd have probably ended up now with millions of dollars more. But I didn't realize that the president here had suggested, because he thought, we're going to get the same amount from the state. We did for that first year. But after that, it would go, and so I got into a little bit of difficulty there. But Fryer did come to my, retirement with a group, because they thought, and, I had done a lot for them. And then, he had trouble at Foothill because they didn't do something financially. And of course, everything hit the fan. I did go up there and do a little work after I retired, but they had made a terrible mistake. And so they had to close part of the summer session. And then he went to Florida State and headed the department there. But he did very well. But
Excuse me, Mr. DeRiccco, what order were the buildings built?
now, that I can't tell you exactly.
But close
I know,
to,
I
yeah.
would say that Cunningham was first, and then would be the agriculture one and all.
Yeah.
Not number 2.
Shima?
Yeah, Shima, and then we would move over and here, and then, of course, the last one building was Atherton,
Oh, I didn't
because
know.
it opened after Blanchard left.
Okay.
Yeah, they brought Blanchard back for it, but it was.
But all the buildings that are here today, except for the child
And
development.
what's his name was last too, Danner.
Oh,
We
Danner.
didn't have Danner, and, Blanchard, of course, had a model of Danner. And he called me in and he said, I don't have any money. Where are you going to get the money to build Danner? I said, I don't know. And he said, why don't you come up with some idea? Well, we did run a revenue bond. You know what that is? We ran well, now they do that. People can do that. At that time, no college had run a revenue bond. And I said, why can't I run a revenue bond? So I called up John McFall, who was in Washington. I said, why can't I run a revenue bond? He goes, give me a list of the colleges that have. I said, nobody. And he said, nobody? And I said, no. He said, well, come to Washington. So I flew to Washington. And of course, now John McFall was the majority whip. Now that puts him in the power next to the speaker. So you figure he can get things done, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, it doesn't make it. If you have a Republican that's there many years, it's the same thing. It's the seniority they get. They have power. Well, we went over to HUD, and he said, he wants a red bond. And he said, what is it going to be? I said, we'll sell the bonds, then we'll pay the bonds off with like the bookstore and all that,
Oh, okay.
pay into it. And the way we will do that is we'll work it out so that, I don't want to pay more than 1%. And they said, well, who's going to pay up if it comes in at, like for instance, the bid comes in at 2.4 or 2.3. I said, I want the federal government to pick up anything over 1%. And McFall goes, I think that's fair. And they agreed.
Oh, wow.
So
That's where Danner came from.
Yeah, now, we had the bond burning on the campus in '87.
Yes, I was
The
there.
bonds were all paid for.
We were paid for completely.
But the revenue bonds, we still had about several $100,000, and you can't find them to pay them off. So
Really?
what we did,
We won't hunt for
we
it.
put the money in, I told, we put it in a separate account, and Bobby or Barron would pay it off. Then when they came in, because they had coupons on them, and they would bring their coupons in, we paid them off. But the money was put aside, so everything was paid for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maria Bernardino?
One of the agencies that we deal with when we are getting ready to do our construction projects is the Division of State Architect. And
The what, excuse me, what was that again?
The Division of State Architect in South
Yes,
Metro.
yes, I understand. Huh?
And
Yeah.
Office of,
Yeah, yeah, you have to get it approved, yeah.
right, and right now, or lately, I guess, we have had issues because they really take a long time to review the projects. They do kind of have a long lead. What was the experience back then with?
Okay, it was the same thing, but remember now, again, I had friends up there. I had Garamendi and a few, and I would go over with them, and we speed it up.
Ah.
And because Blanchard would tell me, you get this done in a certain amount of time, and I did. And another thing, like for instance, I used to go to I went to the committee meetings with Willie Brown. He was not speaker, then he was Ways and Means. And so he would have a subcommittee, and I'd go up there. At first, I made the mistake of disagreeing with him. You don't disagree with Willie Brown. In other words, he can chop you up. And so then I learned that what I would do, like I was trying to get, he would say something like, why don't you spend the money on this instead of that? He wanted to spend the money other ways. Now, he also made a suggestion one time that I'll tell you about that in a minute. He suggested I had about $4.5 million for Atherton. He suggested that since the colleges were in such bad shape, we take that money away from them and split it out and use it for all the colleges. And I got a 4-page letter that I wrote to Governor Garamendi, Pat Johnson, and everybody, and they stuck up for me, and we didn't lose the money, but he would have taken that money too. Now, Willie Brown is a sharp person. I don't care what anybody said. I'll bet on Willie Brown most of the time, but when I met him, in those days, he wasn't the dapper guy that he is today. He was a little more loud dresser. And at that time, I learned that you sort of let him chop you up, and you sort of bow, and you give in, and then the committee passes it. And that's how you get what Willie Brown also called me one time when we were studying, remember the thing with the teachers, collective bargaining. I said, I made the statement, and I did make the statement. I don't believe in collective bargaining and tenure. I think you have one or the other. If you have collective bargaining, you don't have tenure. And he said, that is absolutely stupid. He told me how stupid I was. And of course, I have to agree. When he became mayor of San Francisco, he couldn't believe in civil service and collective bargaining. The same thing I said. I should have called him up. But see, but Willie is a very sharp cookie. He really is. He's a top politician. You know,
Greg?
I used to meet with them sometimes.
I'm sorry, I want to get all their questions
Yes.
in. Greg?
During the original site selection for the college, was there a lot of media attention?
Yes, very much so.
Was it
Very,
positive,
very.
negative? Were they throwing you under the
Yeah,
bus every
well,
other day?
not when we came here, but when we were going over, you know, condemning the property over there, we had, and then when we picked other sites, we had a site near Lodi, you know, up towards the 8 Mile Road we were gonna get. And then we also had a bid. We actually we're gonna have an election. We were, one of the elections we had that failed, we were going to not build here at all. We were gonna build in Lodi and then down low, down on the other side. So we were gonna have on both ends of the district, and that failed. We did have a bond failure. Yeah, we did fail. And then later on, we passed, you know, like I say, DeRiccco Palazzo deserved a lot of credit for passing the bond issue. He was really very good.
Charismatic.
Yeah, and he was he could play the piano, and I criticize him on some things, and, you know, maybe I'm wrong, but he was very good on a lot of and he deserves a lot of credit for that. So, you know, you give him credit, you can criticize him, but you got to give him credit for that. I have to give him credit for that. And so we brought Shirley Temple in. Shirley Temple Black, she came here, and Julio had a party for her. And, you know, I made mistakes there too. See, he said, you be the head of my committee to get money to pass the bond. And, you know, that's not a very good committee to be on. You have to ask for money, you know. And so I said, get someone from the city to do it, who's got a good reputation. He said, you have a good reputation. No, he said, I can't yell at anybody from the city. And I said, I'll get Dean DeCarli to head the committee. You know, Dean DeCarli has good reputation. I said, I know Dean, and I can get Dean. He said, okay, he can be a co-chairman, and you're still going to be the chairman. So I can't yell at Dean. So I made the mistake. I went out, I got money, like from Collins Electric. Of course, I grew up with John Nomalini. So, you know, we grew up together in the South Side, and so I could do some, you know, my we met Temple. But
the dedication tree?
I went and looked.
Oh.
I and then here. Poly Museum have a huge rock, large rock. And I said, how'd you get it? And they told me to roll it down. And I said, my God, and I had. But anyway, the rock was sinking at about an inch a year, but now it stopped sinking. But every time I go by that rock, that's one of my mistakes. We spent a lot of money. We had some and studios down and I had to go down. the difference. Got more.